Hi, TikTokers. I want to tell you a story about what's happened in Newham Council, where a staff member allegedly misappropriated houses and gave some houses to people who weren't eligible for them. So, because it's a live legal case, I've got to be very careful. So, I'm going to read my notes, so forgive the lack of eye contact, but I hope I share with you in as cautious way as possible the story. So, I want to take a closer look at a story that's raised eyebrows across East London and across the entire housing sector. Because it's live a legal case, I need to be extremely careful how I present it, so I'm going to cautiously share my notes and I won't stray from them. Newham Council, one of the country's most pressured local authorities when it comes to social housing. The waiting list stretches into the tens of thousands. Says it has uncovered what it describes as a serious internal housing fraud. According to publicly released committee papers, a housing officer is suspected of manipulating internal systems to allocate 35 homes to people who weren't entitled to them. Newham says it discovered what the investigation could mean for people involved and why the story matters to anyone scrutinising how public services are run. This is a live legal case. Everything we discuss is based strictly on publicly available documentation and published reporting. No individuals have been charged with any offences, and the presumption of innocence applies. This whole situation surfaced on the 5th of November 2025, just a couple of weeks ago, when local outlet Newham Voices reported the findings from a routine meeting of the Council's Audit and Governance Committee. A whistleblower, someone inside the Council, came forward with concerns. They alerted senior staff that something wasn't quite right with the way some properties were being allocated. Now, whistleblowers in local government are like smoke alarms. You hope they never go off, but you're grateful when they do. The council launched its internal checks, and according to Newham's own summary, they found patterns that were unusual, allocations that didn't fit expected criteria, records that seemed out of place, and system entries, in their words, appeared to have been manipulated. At that point, the officer suspected of involvement was confronted, and Newham says they immediately resigned. That line, immediately resigned, sounds dramatic, but in the world of employment investigation, it's fairly common. Resignation does not indicate guilt. It simply means someone chose to leave before the process completed or didn't want to remain in post while inquiries were continuing. So what does Newham claim occurred? According to the published committee papers, the housing officer is suspected of gaining access to internal systems, changing priority statuses, overriding or altering eligibility markers, and ultimately assigning 35 homes to applicants who did not meet the council's threshold for social housing allocation. 35 homes may not sound a lot in a city of 9 million people, but in Newham this is significant because Newham has one of the largest housing registers in the country. Families can remain on temporary accommodation for years. The council calls this a serious internal fraud, but we should underline again that the council's wording describing the behaviour it believes took place is not a court ruling. Now, it's important to be honest about the gaps in public information because this is where a lot of speculation tends to creep in. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. We don't know the name of the staff member. We don't know their rank, though they were clearly in a position with system access. We don't know if any other staff members were involved. We don't know whether the occupants were knowingly involved or were unaware anything irregular occurred. And crucially, we do not know the motive. There has been no public confirmation of bribes, payments, gifts, favours, or anything of that nature. So while it might be tempting to think, why would a staff member do this? Were they paid? Was someone influencing them? It's also tempting to wonder if there was an approval process for allocation, and if so, how was this bypassed? The truth is, nothing like that is currently on public record. Until investigators announce findings, the motives remain an open question. When a tenancy is obtained incorrectly, especially if allocated outside the rules, council have a few options. Each comes with legal and moral complications. Newham says it's conducting a tenancy review process. That usually means checking whether each occupant knew the allocation was irregular, checking whether they provided accurate information, reviewing whether they meet any legitimate criteria now, deciding whether the tenancy should be revoked, converted, or regularised. Now, revoking a tenancy is not simple. If a family has been living in a property for a year or two, if children are enrolled in local schools, if there are health needs at play, a council must balance process with humanity. And even if a tenancy was wrongly allocated, the law still requires a council to act proportionately. So while people may wonder, will the council evict them? That decision depends on more than just the word ineligible. It becomes a legal, social and moral calculation. A bit like immigration, isn't it? When the illegal immigrants. Anyway, I can't digress. This is one of the reasons the investigation will take time. To understand how such a manipulation could take place, it helps to take a step back and consider how housing systems operate. Local authorities are apt to juggle applications, priority assessments, medical reports, waiting list scores, local connection rules, homelessness duties, banding systems, property availability. It's a complicated ecosystem. In some councils, the sheer pressure on housing means the system is almost permanently operating at full capacity. Staff are overstretched, digital systems lag behind modern standards, and internal oversight doesn't always move as fast as the fraudsters or the mistakes. So the real systemic question is, if one person can manipulate the system, how vulnerable is the system itself? And that's the question that Newham is now facing. Whistleblowers aren't always appreciated when they first speak up. Sometimes they're treated as troublemakers, sometimes they're ignored, but without them, organisations cannot always detect wrongdoing, especially when it comes from within. In Newham's case, the whistleblower raised the alarm early. The council says this helped them catch the issue before further allocations could be made. And it's a reminder of why robust whistleblowing policies, protections and culture matter in every organisation, especially those services involving vulnerable residents. When the council itself reports wrongdoing inside its own system, public trust inevitably takes a risk. People want to know, how is this possible? How long has it been going on? How will the council ensure it never happens again? And perhaps most crucially, which families lost out? Because for every home wrongly allocated, there is someone else, possibly homeless, possibly in temporary accommodation, possibly living in overcrowding, who might have been next in line. Newham is already under pressure to show that it can rebuild trust, strengthen checks, and be transparent about improvements. The case has now been referred for further investigation, which may include internal disciplinary reviews, an independent audit, police involvement, recovery of properties, potential civil action, and, depending on the findings, possible criminal proceedings. But again, this is important. No charges have been brought. Everything is at the stage of allegation, assessment and review. The timeline will depend on the complexity of tracking system entries, verifying tenancy store histories and interviewing those involved. Investigations like this can last months, even years. It's very easy to think of local government as paperwork, databases and policy manuals, but for stories like this, remind us that behind each of those 35 homes is a family or an individual with a life affected by this decision they may not have realised was irregular. And behind every family still waiting for a home is another story. Frustration, hope, disappointment and often desperation. So while the story seems to be about systems, it's really about people. For now, the facts remain simple. A whistleblower raised concern. 35 homes were allocated contrary to the rules. A staff member resigned. Investigations are ongoing. Nobody's